My brother left his wife and 3 kids for spiritual enlightenment. 2 years later, he's back broke and wants my help. Aita for refusing? Shocking family barbecue update. I'm Sarah, 42F, and I've been married to Tom, 45M, for 15 years. We have 2 kids, Emily, 13F, and Jack, 10M. We live in a nice suburban house in Oregon that we bought 5 years ago after Tom got a promotion at his engineering firm. I work part-time as a librarian, which allows me to be home when the kids get back from school. My younger brother, Mark, 38M, has always been a bit of a wild card. Growing up, he was the family rebel, always pushing boundaries and getting into trouble. Our parents were strict, and while I towed the line, Mark seemed to thrive on defying them. Despite this, or maybe because of it, we were always close. I was the one who'd cover for him when he snuck out, and he was always there to cheer me up when I was down. Mark met his wife, Lisa, 37F, in high school. She was the straight-A student to his class clown, but somehow they just clicked. They dated all through college, with Lisa often keeping Mark on track when he'd rather party than study. They got married right after graduation, much to our parents' relief. Everyone thought Lisa would be the stabilizing force Mark needed. For a while, it seemed to work. Mark landed a good job at a tech startup, and Lisa became a kindergarten teacher. They had twins, Zoe and Max, 11F and 11M, within a year of marriage. It was a surprise, but they seemed to take it in stride. 3 years later, they had Sophie, 8F. They bought a beautiful house not far from us, and we'd often have family dinners together. But about 2 years ago, things started to change. Mark's company went through a merger, and suddenly his laid-back workplace became high-pressure and corporate. He started complaining about feeling trapped and unfulfilled. At first, we all thought it was just work stress. Lisa encouraged him to find a new job, but Mark said it wasn't just about work, he felt like he'd lost himself. That's when he started getting into what he called spiritual enlightenment. He began meditating for hours, took up yoga, and started attending weekend retreats. He talked constantly about finding his true purpose and living authentically. Lisa was supportive at first, thinking it was just a phase or a harmless hobby. But then Mark started missing family events. He skipped Zoe and Max's piano recital because it clashed with a meditation retreat. He forgot Sophie's birthday because he was on a silent yoga weekend. Lisa was left to handle everything at home, on top of her teaching job. I remember her calling me in tears one night, saying she felt like a single parent. Things came to a head 6 months later. Mark called a family meeting. Lisa, the kids, me, Tom, and our parents were all there. He announced that he was quitting his job, selling the house, and moving to a commune in New Mexico. He'd met some people at a retreat who told him about this life-changing place. He wanted Lisa and the kids to come with him, talking about how they'd live off the land and find true happiness. Lisa was shocked. She flat out refused, saying the kids needed stability, education, and their friends. The kids were confused and upset. Our parents were furious, telling Mark he was throwing his life away. I tried to mediate, to get Mark to see reason, but he was adamant. He said we were all too attached to material things and couldn't see the bigger picture. That night, Mark packed a bag and left. Over the next few weeks, he sold his share of the house to Lisa, emptied their joint bank account, leaving Lisa with just her teacher's salary to support 3 kids, and just vanished. He'd occasionally call or text the kids, always with some excuse about why he couldn't visit or send money. Lisa was devastated. She had to quickly find a full-time teaching position and take on tutoring gigs on the side to make ends meet. They had to sell the big house and move to a small apartment. I helped out as much as I could, babysitting the kids and helping Lisa navigate single parenthood. Our parents tried to help too, but they were so angry at Mark that it often just stressed Lisa out more. For 2 years, life went on. Lisa and the kids struggled, but they were managing. The twins had trouble in school for a while, acting out due to the stress at home, but with some counseling, they improved. Sophie seemed to adjust the best, but she'd sometimes ask when Daddy was coming home, which would break all our hearts. Then, last month, out of the blue, Mark showed up at my doorstep. He looked terrible, thin, unkempt, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were worn and dirty. He said the commune life wasn't what he expected. The work was backbreaking, the living conditions were primitive, and the spiritual enlightenment he sought never came. He'd left the commune 6 months ago and had been hitchhiking around the country, picking up odd jobs here and there. Now he was broke and had nowhere to go. He asked if he could stay with us just for a little while until he got back on his feet. I was shocked and angry. All I could think about was how Lisa's eyes had dark circles too, from working long hours to support her kids. How the twins had struggled in school because their dad abandoned them. How little Sophie would ask about her dad with such hope in her eyes. I told Mark absolutely not. I reminded him of how he'd abandoned his family and how much they had struggled. I said he should go to Lisa and beg for forgiveness, not come running to me. Mark got upset. He said I was being unfair, that he'd made a mistake and needed family support to turn his life around. He accused me of being judgmental and said that as his sister, I should help him no matter what. He brought up all the times he'd been there for me when we were younger, how he'd supported me when I had my miscarriage before Emily was born, how he'd helped Tom land his job at the engineering firm. I stood my ground. I told him that while I appreciated those things, they didn't erase what he'd done to Lisa and the kids. I said he needed to take responsibility for his actions and make amends to his family before asking for help. I told him to leave. Mark's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to come to me for comfort after our parents scolded him. But then his expression hardened. He called me some nasty names, saying I was just like our parents, cold and unforgiving. He stormed off, slamming the door behind him. I felt terrible watching him go. Part of me wanted to run after him, to give him a hug and tell him everything would be okay like I used to when we were kids. But I couldn't forget the pain in Lisa's voice every time she talked about how the kids missed their dad, or the way the twins' faces would fall every time they saw a father playing with his kids at the park. Later that day, I called Lisa to warn her that Mark was back in town. She thanked me for the heads up and for not letting him stay with me. She said she wouldn't let him see the kids unless he showed real change and commitment. She sounded tired but determined. That evening, my parents called. Apparently, Mark had gone to them after I turned him away. They were furious with me for not helping my brother in his time of need. They said family should always come first and that I was being cruel. My mom said she was ashamed of me and that I should apologize to Mark immediately. My dad, who had always been closer to Mark, said I was jealous of the attention Mark was getting and that I needed to grow up. Their words hurt, bringing back memories of how they'd always seemed to favor Mark when we were growing up. How they praise him for the smallest accomplishment while taking my good grades and behavior for granted. But I stood firm, telling them that enabling Mark wasn't going to help him in the long run. I'm torn. Part of me feels guilty for turning away my brother when he clearly needed help. I keep thinking about how lost and desperate he looked. But a bigger part of me is still angry at what he did and doesn't trust that he's really changed. I worry that if I help him now, I'll just be setting him up to hurt his family again. Tom supports my decision. He says Mark needs to face the consequences of his actions and that our first loyalty should be to Lisa and the kids. But my parents are putting a lot of pressure on me to reconcile with Mark. They've even threatened to cut me out of their will if I don't help him. I can't help but wonder if I'm being too harsh. Maybe if I'd let Mark stay, I could have helped him get back on his feet and reconnect with his kids. But then I think about how many chances he's had already, how many times he's disappointed the people who love him. So, Reddit, Aita for refusing to let my brother stay with us? Update 1, it's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank you all for your supportive comments. They really helped me stand firm in my decision and gave me the courage to handle what came next. The day after I posted, Mark showed up at Lisa's apartment. He begged her to let him see the kids, but she refused unless he agreed to her conditions. 1, he had to get a job in his own place to live. 2, he had to start paying child support. And 3, he had to attend family counseling with her and the kids. Mark initially balked at these terms, saying Lisa was being controlling and that she was alienating the kids from him. But Lisa stood her ground, saying these were the minimum requirements for him to be part of their lives again. Meanwhile, my parents continued to pressure me to help Mark. They called almost daily, alternating between guilt-tripping and threatening. They even showed up at our house one evening, trying to convince Tom to change my mind. When that didn't work, they threatened to cut me out of their will and said they'd tell the kids that I was the reason their Uncle Mark couldn't see them. I was hurt by their attitude, but I refused to give in. Tom and I decided to take a break from communicating with them until they could respect our decision. About 2 weeks ago, Mark called me. His voice sounded different, more humble and apologetic. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking and realized how selfish he'd been. He told me he'd found a job at a local warehouse and was staying at a cheap motel. He asked if we could meet for coffee to talk. I was hesitant, remembering all the times in the past when Mark had seemed to change, only to revert to his old ways. But after talking it over with Tom, I agreed to meet him at a local cafe. When I saw Mark, I was surprised by how much better he looked. He'd cleaned up, gotten a haircut, and seemed more like his old self. He apologized sincerely for his behavior, both recently and when he left his family. He admitted he'd had a mental health crisis, feeling trapped by the responsibilities of family life and work stress. He said he'd convinced himself that leaving was the only way to find happiness, but he realized now that he'd been running away from the things that truly mattered. Mark told me he was now on medication for anxiety and depression, and seeing a therapist regularly. He showed me his prescription bottles and his therapist's business card as proof. He said the therapy was helping him understand why he'd made such destructive choices and how to make better ones in the future. What struck me most was that Mark didn't ask to stay with us again. Instead, he asked if I could help him rebuild his relationship with his kids. He said he'd agreed to Lisa's conditions and wanted to make amends. He also apologized for putting our parents in the middle and said he told them to back off. I was cautiously optimistic but still wary. I told Mark I appreciated his apology and was glad he was getting help, but that he had a long way to go to regain my trust. I agreed to talk to Lisa about arranging supervised visits with the kids, but I made it clear that I wouldn't be involved beyond that. I also told him that if he ever abandoned his family again, he'd lose me as a sister for good. After our meeting, I called Lisa. She confirmed that Mark had been in touch and was complying with her conditions so far. He'd shown her proof of his job and had already made his first child support payment. She said she was willing to let him have short, supervised visits with the kids, but she was taking it one day at a time. The first visit happened last weekend. Lisa asked me to be there as a neutral party. It was awkward and emotional. The twins were angry at first, barely speaking to Mark. Sophie was confused, alternating between clinging to Mark and hiding behind Lisa. Mark tried his best, bringing small gifts and asking about their lives, but it was clear that rebuilding these relationships would take time. As for my parents, they called to apologize for their behavior. They admitted they had overreacted out of worry for Mark and shouldn't have tried to manipulate me. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship, but I'm keeping firm boundaries. I've made it clear that while I love them, I won't tolerate any more attempts to guilt or threaten me into doing what they think is right. I'm still processing everything that's happened. Part of me wants to believe that Mark has really changed this time, but I'm trying to temper my hope with realism. I'm proud of Lisa for standing her ground and putting the kids first. And I'm grateful for Tom's unwavering support through all of this. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I'm cautiously allowing Mark back into my life, but I'm watching carefully to see if his actions match his words. I'm also trying to be there for Lisa and the kids as they navigate this complicated situation. I'll keep you updated if anything significant happens. Again, thank you all for your support and advice. It's been a challenging time, but I feel more confident in my decisions and my ability to handle whatever comes next. Update 2. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and things have continued to evolve in ways I didn't expect. Mark has been consistently following through on his commitments, which has been a pleasant surprise. He's been working steadily at the warehouse and has even gotten a promotion to shift supervisor. His boss apparently values his tech background and has been giving him projects to improve their inventory management system. Mark seems genuinely excited about this work, saying he combines his tech skills with practical, tangible results. He's found a small apartment not far from Lisa's place and has been regularly paying child support. He's also been attending therapy sessions twice a week and family counseling with Lisa and the kids every other weekend. From what Lisa has told me, he's been actively participating and working on communication skills. The supervised visits with the kids have been going well, all things considered. At first, the children were hesitant and angry, especially the twins. Zoe would often give Mark the silent treatment, while Max would ask pointed questions about why he left. But Mark has been patient and persistent. He's been showing up consistently, listening to their feelings without getting defensive, and trying to rebuild trust. Sophie, being younger, was quicker to warm up to him. She's always been a daddy's girl, and she was thrilled to have him back in her life. This actually caused some tension with the twins, who felt Sophie was being disloyal to Lisa. It took some careful mediation from both Lisa and Mark to help the kids understand that it's okay to have different feelings about the situation. Lisa has been cautiously optimistic about Mark's progress. She told me that while she's glad he's stepping up for the kids, she has no interest in reconciling romantically. In fact, she's started dating someone new, Chris, 39M, a fellow teacher she met at a conference. This has added some complexity to the situation. About a month ago, Mark asked if he could come over for dinner at our house. Tom and I agreed, and it was surprisingly nice. Mark was engaged with our kids, asking Emily about her soccer team and helping Jack with a math problem. He apologized to Tom for his past behavior and thanked us both for maintaining boundaries. It felt like a glimpse of the old Mark, before he lost his way. However, not everything has been smooth sailing. Last week, Mark's therapist suggested he consider moving closer to his kids to be more involved in their daily lives. Mark brought this up with Lisa, who became upset. She felt like he was trying to insert himself too quickly back into their lives and worried it might confuse the kids. She also admitted she was concerned about how it might affect her relationship with Chris. This led to an argument where some old resentment surfaced. Lisa accused Mark of trying to play happy families without acknowledging the pain he caused. She brought up how the twins had struggled in school after he left, how Sophie had cried herself to sleep for months. Mark felt Lisa was being unfair and not recognizing his efforts to change. He pointed out that he'd been consistent for months now and deserved a chance to be more involved in his kids' lives. I found myself caught in the middle again. Lisa called me, furious and seeking support. She vented about how Mark always got to swoop in and be the fun parent while she had to do all the hard work. Mark texted, frustrated and looking for advice. He said he felt like no matter what he did, it would never be enough. I tried my best to stay neutral, encouraging them both to discuss this in their next counseling session rather than letting emotions escalate. I reminded Lisa of how far Mark had come, while also validating her fears. With Mark, I emphasized the need for patience and understanding, given the pain his actions had caused. My parents, true to form, have their own opinions. They think Mark should move closer to the kids and that Lisa is being too harsh. They've been pressuring me to advocate for Mark, which has led to some tense conversations. I've had to remind them repeatedly that this isn't my decision to make and that they need to respect Lisa's role as the primary caregiver. As for me, I'm trying to maintain a supportive but distanced role. I'm proud of the progress Mark has made, but I also understand Lisa's caution. The kids seem to be doing better with the current arrangement, and I worry that too much change too quickly could be disruptive. I've been encouraging Mark to focus on quality time with the kids rather than quantity for now. Tom and I have decided to host a family barbecue next month, inviting Mark, Lisa and the kids, and my parents. We're hoping that a neutral, casual setting might help ease some of the tensions. I'm a bit nervous about how it will go, especially with my parents there, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I'll update again after the barbecue if there are any significant developments. Thank you all for your continued support and advice. It's been a challenging journey, but I'm hopeful that we're moving towards a more stable and positive future for everyone involved. Update 3. It's been about 6 weeks since my last update, and I'm still reeling from the events of our family barbecue. What we hoped would be a peaceful gathering turned into a day of unexpected revelations and heightened emotions. The day started well enough. Mark arrived early to help set up, which I appreciated. He seemed nervous but eager to make a good impression. Lisa came with the kids shortly after, and I was glad to see the twins actually greet Mark with hugs instead of their usual reluctance. My parents showed up last, bearing desserts and forced smiles. At first, the atmosphere was tense but civil. The kids played in the yard while the adults made awkward small talk. Things took a turn when Lisa's new boyfriend, Chris, unexpectedly showed up. Apparently, there had been a miscommunication. Lisa thought I knew she was bringing him, but I had no idea. Mark visibly tensed up, but to his credit, he remained polite. Chris seemed nice enough, but his presence definitely added an extra layer of tension to the gathering. As the afternoon wore on, the kids seemed to be enjoying themselves, especially interacting with Mark. Even Zoe and Max were laughing at their dad's jokes and showing him their latest school projects. Seeing this, my mother made a comment about how the family is finally healing and how everything could go back to normal now. That's when Lisa lost her cool. She snapped at my mother, saying there was no going back to normal after what Mark had done. She pointed out how the kids still had trust issues, how she'd struggled financially, and how their lives had been turned upside down. This led to a heated argument, with my parents defending Mark and Lisa detailing the struggles she and the kids had faced. In the midst of this, Mark shocked everyone by announcing that he had been offered a job in New Mexico, at a tech company near his old commune. He said he was considering taking it because the pay was excellent and the work was exciting, but he was torn about being far from the kids again. The backyard erupted into chaos. Lisa accused Mark of planning to abandon the kids again, saying this proved he hadn't really changed. Mark insisted he was just exploring options and that he would never leave without discussing it with everyone first. My parents jumped in, saying Mark had the right to pursue his career and that modern technology meant he could still be involved in the kids' lives from a distance. Chris tried to calm everyone down, which only seemed to irritate Mark more. Amidst the arguing, we all failed to notice that the kids had come back into the yard. It wasn't until we heard Sophie's tearful voice asking, "Is Daddy leaving us again?" that everyone fell silent. The look of hurt and confusion on the children's faces was heartbreaking. Zoe and Max looked angry and betrayed, while Sophie clung to Lisa, crying. Tom, bless him, quickly ushered the kids inside for ice cream while the adults tried to compose themselves. I was furious with everyone for letting things escalate like this in front of the children. Once the kids were out of earshot, I laid into all of them. I told Mark he was selfish for even considering moving away again, especially without discussing it with Lisa first. I criticized Lisa for bringing Chris without warning, knowing it would upset the delicate balance we'd achieved. I scolded my parents for their insensitivity and for continuing to pressure everyone. And I admitted my own fault in thinking this gathering was a good idea in the first place. The barbecue ended shortly after, with everyone leaving in various states of anger and hurt. The following week was a flurry of tense phone calls and text messages. Mark decided to turn down the job in New Mexico, realizing that rebuilding his relationship with his kids was more important than any career opportunity. He apologized profusely to Lisa and the kids, promising to be more thoughtful in the future. Lisa agreed to be more communicative about Chris's involvement in family events. She acknowledged that while she had the right to move on, she needed to be sensitive to how it affected Mark and the kids. Chris, to his credit, offered to step back a bit to give the family more time to heal. My parents, after a long conversation with me, finally agreed to stop intervening and let Mark and Lisa handle their own situation. They admitted that their desire to see the family reunited had clouded their judgment, and they promised to be more supportive of Lisa's decisions in the future. As for me, I'm exhausted. I've realized that while I want to support my brother and his kids, I need to create clearer boundaries. I'm not responsible for fixing their family, and trying to do so is taking a toll on my own. Tom and I have decided to take a step back from the situation. We'll still be there for the kids, but we're going to let Mark and Lisa navigate their co-parenting relationship without our input. I've also decided to start seeing a therapist myself to work through my feelings about this whole situation. I realize now that a lot of my reactions are tied to old family dynamics and my own fears about abandonment and responsibility. This might be my final update unless something significant changes. The road ahead for Mark, Lisa, and the kids is still long and likely to have more bumps along the way. But I'm cautiously optimistic that they're all committed to making it work, whatever form that might take. Thank you all for your support throughout this challenging time. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family healing is a long, complicated process, and there are no easy solutions. But with patience, communication, and a willingness to change, it is possible to move forward.